Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. I hope your day is going great. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a friend of mine, Kyle Snarr. Kyle lives in Pelham, New York, where he dabbles in entrepreneurship, screenwriting, and spends his free time car spotting, gear collecting, and camping with his wife and 4 kids. Also, he's a content marketer and creative consultant who's worked with digital platforms and publications such as Flipboard, Vox, Gear Patrol, and currently is the head of partnerships at Worn and Wound, where he also leads the largest consumer watch event in the world, the Wind Up Watch Fair. I'm excited to learn a little more about that.
Cool.
Throughout his career, he's helped clients like Pepsi, Adidas, Topo, Designs, Porsche, BMW, and Citizen build their brands and reach new audiences through launching fresh approaches to content activations and campaigns. Kyle, I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. I'm very glad to be here. It's been fun listening to your episodes, and I'm glad to have been invited. So thank you, man.
Yeah, it's great to connect. We were talking just before we got on, just kind of tying things back to when we first got to know each other, and it ties back to a little social commerce institute here in Utah that started, like 2013 or something?
Yeah, maybe 12, 13, somewhere in that realm.
It was early. I remember we were talking about this little thing called Instagram at the time.
Right, exactly.
And and kind of coming out of that, right? Like out of those early days, you've been a marketer for 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
Like LinkedIn, you consider yourself a creative conversationalist. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think we all kind of try and find a way to create a little brand for ourselves, and for my professional career, I think storytelling is one of my favorite things in the whole world. My kids, they consider me a little bit of like the big fish storyteller, weaving yarns of days of yore. I love telling stories from various times of my life. And I love communicating a conversational tone. I think it's really important to speak to people in a way that does not put any sort of barriers between you and your recipient. And so when you can speak in a conversational way, it's just a way of saying that, we're really kind of getting down to the nitty gritty and in an honest and transparent way. I think podcasting actually is a way that like the conversational tone is really kind of taken off in a professional sense. Yeah. And I just love that idea of applying my creativity through the lens of storytelling in a conversational way. So a creative conversationalist. I like talking.
No, I love it. I think it's interesting, right? Like you bring up podcasts, right? And we see this just growth of long form content really probably over the last 15 years, but I feel like it just keeps snowballing, right? Keeps growing. I publish all of my podcasts on Substack. I also write usually a weekly article there, keep a newsletter through there, right? And it's amazing to see what the Substack community is becoming, right? And you've got Medium and you've got all of these other avenues, podcasting, all of this stuff where it's long form content, right? And even a lot of brands are starting to dip into that in video or the written word or whatever, and less so for SEO and more for just this conversation, which is kind of flipping really that quick scroll 5-second hook video on its head a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both valid. I think they're both growing. I don't think that the quick scroll is going to go away anytime soon.
No, I don't either.
But as someone who creates a tremendous amount of long form branded content for a living, I can definitely attest that when you have a very, very specific audience, you know who your audience is and you know how to speak to them in a way that can engage with them and they want to spend time with you, then it's worth investing in high levels of creativity that are right for the message you're trying to get across. Sometimes that message is correct in a short 5-second script. But if you have a messaging and stories to tell that require or deserve a longer format, embrace it, use it, love it. Yeah, I think it's really important to let the story mandate the form factor.
Absolutely. What are some things that you've seen in storytelling within marketing? Like how has that evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah. I think when I was in school, I was a film student at BYU. I was kind of I was kind of building my whole curriculum around screenwriting for feature-length films, right? And about halfway through film school, I was able to go to the movie theater one night, right? I went to the movie theater all the time in school. And one night, this was not common at the time. This was actually the first time I ever had seen, before the previews started, a TV commercial came on. But it was a very, very cinematically shot TV commercial. It was actually for a Volkswagen Cabrio convertible. And it was an amazingly well shot TV spot. It was on the big screen. It was widescreen. And it introduced me to one of my favorite music artists. I hadn't heard of this song or this artist before. And it was just this beautifully shot commercial. It was extremely cinematic. And something clicked for me that day. It just totally clicked. And I was like, I don't want to necessarily only tell full-length feature stories. I think you can do something amazing in a 60-second or even 30-second spot. And so I immediately, the next day, started minoring in advertising at BYU, minoring in comms with an emphasis in advertising at BYU. I conned my way into many creative classes as I could, ones that you had to usually kind of present a portfolio for. I was literally sweet talking my way into classes that I had no right to be in, and minored in communications with an emphasis in advertising. And that from that point on, I really just fell in love with the idea of storytelling for commerce, like using stories to get people to find cool stuff that's going to enhance their life. And that's how I've spent the majority of my career.
I love it. There's a lot that we can pull out of that story, and let's focus less on the marketing advertising side of it and the life experience of it, right? So you're sitting there and if you don't show up to the movie early or your life changed from that 60-second spot.
Yeah, legitimately. Yes.
I think it's phenomenal to think about, right? As we look at these micro events in our lives and flex events, whatever we want to call them, right? But these moments of transition are so minor, but they set us on a course that dictates everything, most of what we do for the rest of our lives, right? And I look at the way I met my wife, for example, right? I showed up at a track event that I had no plans to go to, and because I was there, a buddy introduced me to this girl, and we ended up dating, right? It's like these, just being in the right place at the right time, per se, right? And how impactful that is on the decisions that we make. And I think that's such a powerful lesson for young kids, teenagers, college students, right? That sometimes go pursue the path that you're interested in, but be aware of those moments that can awaken you to that new course, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great way to say that.
So I think that's such an awesome story. Okay. And you remember, right? You remember what the advertisement was about. You remember the song that was playing.
Nick Drake,
all of those
Pink
things
Moon. Yeah, of course.
No, we don't forget those moments, right? They're so impactful. We can visualize, okay, I know you can probably, I don't know if you remember exactly the seat number, but you can probably picture where you were sitting in the theater. And
it's imprinted in my brain for time and all eternity, right? So
yeah, beautiful. It's beautiful. So back to the film part of it, right? So that sets you on this journey of storytelling and kind of content marketing. What are, as you've experienced, right? As a storyteller, what are the elements that you kind of feel are key and crucial to telling a good story?
Telling a good story? Yeah, I think for me, I always like kind of bringing it to an elemental part of life. It's really easy to get to know someone when you say the words, when I was growing up, even though that sounds a little grandpa-ish, I suppose. But when I was growing up, I loved blank. And all of a sudden, everyone can start to associate with where you're coming from and what you're doing. It's really interesting. I think in one of my roles, I did a lot of training to a sales team around presentation styles. And I think when we get in front of an audience, it's our instinct is to say, "Hi, my name is Kyle. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for coming." And the second you start saying those things, I guarantee I know what's going to happen in the room. Every single person's going to look down at their phone, right? Every single person's going to look down at their phone. But if I were to walk into a room and the first things out of my mouth are not or hi, but the first things out of my mouth is something like this. When I was growing up, I had a dog named Murphy, and Murphy thought he was a human. Like, all of a sudden, you have the reverse impact of heads going down and looking at phones. You start with a story, and every single person's head in that room is going to pop up. Just start talking, start telling a story, and every single head will pop up. I've done this thousands of times. I know it works. So there is something elemental about keying into, I think, just something that is very relatable, personal, and real and true, that if you skip all the pleasantries, you can always say hi later. You can always say my name is so-and-so later. But when you can just start telling a story, everyone wants to pay attention whether they want to or is going to pay attention whether they want to or not, you know? It's really interesting, kind of almost like a superpower. It's like Jedi mind tricks. It's like you can actually like bend people to your will by just telling a story. It's wild.
What a great insight and kind of communication tool, right? Like, to your point, right? Like, conversational. I think today, like, we get caught up in the routine, right? Like, of the small talk, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm so and so. Or the one that really drives me bonkers is so what do you do?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Do you really care about what I do? Like, if you care more about what I do than who I am, then we're not going to make great friends.
Yeah.
Because the question, what do you do, almost has this connotation to it, to like, what can I get out of you, right? Like, what can I get from you?
Or are you lesser or greater than what I do, you know?
Sure, right.
Yeah.
How do we compare, right? Like, where do we
Right.
sit on the totem poles together, right? Like,
Right.
where are we in relation to each other? And I was at a lunch a month or so ago, and somebody sat down next to me, and this was kind of a networking lunch, right? And he asks, he's like, so what do you do? And I was like, I hate that question. And I just called him out. I was like, I hate that question. And he's like, whoa, okay. Frankly, so do I. I don't even know why I asked it. But
Yeah.
we got into this much deeper philosophical question about like, why do we use that question, right? Like, and I'm like, as you tell your story, right? Like, when I was young, I had a dog that thought he was a human, right? Like, I just think to great authors, right? Great books.
Mm.
And if you think to some of these great books that you read, they often start out with a narrative, right?
Yeah. Like right into it.
And they get right into this narrative, they start telling a story, and then that story lays the framework for the rest of the lessons that they're going to teach throughout the book. And I'm gonna put myself on the spot here a little bit, but I started reading Adam Grant's latest book, right? I put it on the shelf because there was a couple other things that I needed for my own life to explore before that, but I remember it just pulling me in. I can't remember what the story was, so I have to pull the book out and reread the first chapter again. But I just remember that it was that, right? Like, it was like, okay, I really want to read this book, not because it's Adam Grant, which I wanted to read it because it's Adam Grant, right? Like, I love his work and what he's written, but he pulled me right in with this story. And I was like, okay, like, what are you going to teach me? Like, let's go. Like, I'm ready, right?
I think most people you just have to kind of flip it. Like, I think a lot of people do tell stories when they have to speak, whether it's at a business meeting or if it's at a panel presentation or if it's in a church. Like, you're probably going to tell a story at some point. Just tell the story first.
Yeah.
And then introduce yourself later and talk about every other things later. But like, tell the story first. Grab the attention of the audience. Change the dynamic in the room, and you'll be surprised, you know, where they're willing to go with you at that point.
Right. No, like, I think if you compared like TED Talk to your college like communications presentation, you would start to see this difference, right? Like, you stand up in your college presentation and you're like, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm going to talk on. And that's the other thing, right? Like, don't tell me what you're going to talk on.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, just explain what you're going to talk on within the subject matter and the stories that you're going to tell, right? Like, you don't need, if I want a title, I'll go read the book or I'll go read the article.
Totally.
I don't need the title in the presentation, right? So, no, I love it. Communication is such an interesting thing too, right? Like, and I think one of the things that you talk about with controversial, right, is I think like stories also tear down walls.
Mm.
and they make us more susceptible to listen
Yeah.
and to meet each other where we're at.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's relatable.
It's also interesting too when it comes to like my profession, which I work for, a publication that has journalists that review products, right? And, it's really important for this particular publication, for those journalists to never have to sell out, to never have to feel bought, to always be able to, hold their journalistic integrity. But I have to tell stories. I'm a marketer. I'm the marketing wing of this digital publication. I'm not going to be reviewing a product and having that kind of like thumbs up kind of attitude around it if I'm being paid to say this. So I need to come up with really creative ways to tell stories about product that aren't going to be ever confused with a review and ever confused with like being bought and sold for us in quote unquote endorsing a product. So it's what I see that as is a creative challenge is, well, how do you go out there and tell great stories about products that are paid for, but aren't going to be read as a review or an endorsement? And that's a creative challenge that fortunately we found some ways to really connect with the audience with branded content in a way that doesn't detract or make any of our, true journalistic integrity compromised in any way, shape, or form.
So how do you do that without
Yeah, I
giving away
mean,
your secret sauce?
well, no, I'm happy to, honestly. So like, I started off my career in design and advertising and working at agencies. I worked at agencies for 12 years. And then fortunately, I've made my way into digital publishing and kind of never looked back. I really love working in digital publishing, mainly because of the pace in which it works and like the creativity that you're like given by the client. Because when we're in digital publishing, we're talking to an audience that we know better than they do. And they trust us to tell our audience about their product in the way that our audience is going to be best receive it. And so there's just immense amount of trust given to the creative teams at digital publishers because again, like it's our audience, it's not theirs, and they're hoping to connect with the audience that we know and love. So at different publications over the years, I've seen a couple of things. I have seen publications that try really hard to make their branded content look as similar to organic editorial as possible, in hopes that someone might not recognize that it's sponsored. And that to me is a big problem. That feels like it's misrepresentation. That feels like it's trying to sneak one past the goalie. And when people inevitably see that it is sponsored, what's their opinion of that all of a sudden? It's like, oh man, I was like, they lied to me. I thought this was not paid for.
Yeah.
And I think that's a horrible position to be in as a publication and as a brand to like piss off your consumer out of the gate. And I've seen that happen at publications I've worked at. And I have always said, if I were ever in the position to not let that happen, I would. And so fortunately, when I came to my current position at Worn and Wound, I pitched an idea to the founders and said, like, why don't we have franchises within the publication that we explain to our audience at the beginning, this is always going to be branded content. And we change the look and feel of those sections of the site to look nothing like the editorial sections. And we build up as much trust with our audience by having the best content, the best photography, the best videos, all that live within these sub franchises of the main kind of website. And something amazing happened, like when we dedicated ourselves to building up these kind of sub brands around branded content so it would never get confused with regular content. We won the trust and we explained it. We got on a podcast and we broke it down for our audience. This is what this franchise is all about. It's always going to be sponsored, but we promise you that we're going to put this much effort into, the content, into the storytelling. We're never going to promote or endorse the product or say that you have to get it, but we are going to tell great stories with the product and find amazing people who do love the brand and tap into their stories as well. And what has happened is really something that in my first time in my entire career in advertising, which is we've earned fans of these franchises. So almost my entire life in advertising, I've been either behind or producing or helping create content that people want to either skip or mute. And for the first time in my career, I'm creating content that people look forward to, and they ping me and ask me, when's the next one coming out? So what we've done is actually created these fans within our ecosystem for this style of branded content. And it's all above board because we started out of the gate with the notion that this franchise is always going to be purpose built for, sponsored content. You can go to other parts of our website for the organic edit, and that's fine. But if you're here, you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And that type of transparency, that type of like kind of leaning into it and not trying to pretend it's not branded or not trying to hide the fact that it's branded has been amazing. It's boded so well for us. And like I said, for the first time in my career, I just want to be like, guys, this is advertising, right? Like, you're being advertised to, but I think the care and the nuance we put into it, we earn that respect.
Love it. And I think the key right there, right, is transparency. And how important is that, right? And it's an interesting thing. We live in this day and age of influencers, right? Like, and there's always been influencers to some extent, but now with social media, it's permeated our society in such a way, right? Like anybody can go post online, but so much of it is there's not a lot of transparency.
No, not at all. Yeah.
And the FCC comes out and says, okay, you have to put hashtag ad or whatever with your post just to make it call. But that doesn't do it, right? Like,
no.
But people have caught on to it, right? It's like, okay, like if Khloe Kardashian is selling me ice cream, that's not legit. It's not like, and I think it's really interesting as an influencer or as a brand or looking to just build your following and your community and whatever that is, right? And so much of it comes down to transparency, right? Like we're going to tell you what it is, right? Like instead of this kind of traditional, like, okay, I'm going to try and sneak this across your screen and say, hey, you need to buy this, right? Because it's the next thing since sliced bread or whatever. But no, it's this complete transparency of, hey, this is our gate for sponsored content, but we're going to tell awesome stories with it. We're going to use it to just tell you how it experienced life and these other benefits and all of these things associated with it. But then we're going to have our complete editorial side over here that's completely separate, different gate, right? Like,
yep, exactly.
And same company, same, right? The same ecosystem, but
same principles as well, Yeah, exactly.
But I love it. I love that concept of transparency. And I think like one of the hardest things for me as a marketer, right? Like, and especially when I went freelance and it was just like, okay, I'm selling more crap in ways that to people that don't necessarily need it. And what am I doing, right? Like I'm just trying to convince people to buy stuff that they don't really need.
Well, so this was something that I definitely was interested in talking to you about because I had this exact same moral conundrum. So at one point I was working for Vox Media, and Vox Media is a pretty big publisher these days. They have a bunch of great titles. And I can tell you right now that every single person there is extremely, extremely genuine in their desire to make this world a better place, and it was a very interesting place to work. I mean, just people there were truly in search of the truth and really trying to create content that peeled back and try to, like they say there all the time, they're trying to explain the news. They really want people to make educated decisions. And it was a very inspiring place to work. Every day I felt like I was doing something good. I was working at a place that was working hard to make the world better. And then one day I got a text and it was from a friend who worked at a publication called Gear Patrol, which is a publication that I love and read and really enjoyed. And he just texted me, says, go look at the website right now. And sure enough, on the website, there was a role that was like tailor-made for me, tailor-made for me. And he's like, you got to apply right now. And I was very fortunate. And I picked up this role, head of marketing at Gear Patrol. And I started there, and it was sad to leave my team at Vox, but I was so excited to go to this kind of dream style role. And like 1 week into being at Gear Patrol, I was like, what have I done? Because all of a sudden I started feeling like you were feeling like, oh no, I'm now what am I just doing? Hawking products? Like that's all I'm doing now? It's like I was at a place that was literally trying to like better society. And now I'm like in this world of just product reviews and product sales and things like that. And I was having a little bit of a crisis of conscience, And so I sat there and I kind of really thought about this, and I felt like I had made the right decision, but I wanted to make it feel right within me. And I started thinking about this notion of materialism. Materialism sounds like a really bad thing. We talk about being too materialistic and that whole idea of just putting so much weight on these tangible items that we don't even take with us at the end of the day. I was like, that's kind of what I'm celebrating right now. But like, I started thinking, when we're born into this world, we don't have sharp teeth. We don't have claws. We don't have fur. We as human beings need stuff.
We do
need stuff.
Yeah.
So materialism cannot just be bad. It can't. We will not survive on this planet without some degree of materialism. And so I said, there's got to be someone who's like written about this or something. And fortunately, there was like a book written by two names I'm not going to even try to pronounce, but it was written, Cambridge professors wrote a book called The Meaning of Things. And they identified that there are actually two types of materialism. Okay. There's what they call terminal materialism, which is kind of the bad kind, right? It's about you are after the thing. You are taking your energy and your time and your effort to try and get the thing. And that's where the story ends. But they also identify something called instrumental materialism. And that is when you get the thing, that's when the story begins. And I think that for me really changed my whole idea of what I was doing at Gear Patrol. And it gave me the confidence and excitement, frankly, to help people find objects to let the story begin. And so, you said earlier, it's hard when you're a marketer because you're trying to get this stuff to people that they don't really need, but there is stuff they do need. Sure. And there is stuff that can better people's lives and can last longer and can be an heirloom that I can give to my kid, or that can, save me time or money or make me more efficient or just bring me joy, like actual joy. So I think it's not so much about being a marketer is like, okay, like I'm just a sellout and I'm just like hawking whatever, but like finding the brands and finding the stories around those products that can actually be that idea of instrumental materialism. It's an instrument. It's a tool for making our life better. It's a tool for making me a better person, to make me run faster, to make my kids smarter, to, bring me some downright joy in my life. So things are important and things are good. They're not bad, but if it's how we approach it, it's how we look at it, it's what we do with our time and money and effort. And it's also what inspiration we draw from it and how do we make it better for others by what we surround ourselves with. If it's not curated, it is not being chosen wisely, then it is bad, even if it's good stuff. But if you're making conscious decisions and you're being really smart about how you curate the things around you, I think that there's something there. There's something powerful there that can elevate us in this life.
Okay, I'm reading the book. It's on the list. That's fascinating to think about, because I think so often we tend to fall into the camp of like, okay, we either want more, or we decry those that want more, right? Like we got to simplify. We got to go down to base roots, right? Like I've got to wear this jacket for 40 years and buy no other jacket. I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with it, right? Like I think that's actually good because there's some environmentalism that comes into that, and the worn wear concept that Patagonia's rolled out, right? Like those things I think are really important. But I love this concept of instrumental materialism, because if I think about, like, do I need the smartwatch? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
But if the smartwatch plays a part in me closing my rings, to use an Apple term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so that I get my 45-minute workout in and I burn my calories and I get my 10,000 steps, right? Like, if that's the tool that gets me to do that, then it can change my life.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I'm sedentary and I'm sitting on the couch and I need something to motivate me, and it's that watch, then maybe I should get the watch and get motivated and get off the couch.
It's funny you should select an Apple Watch because it's the antithesis of the type of watches that I spend my life around every single day. So the watches I spend my life around,
Touche.
they don't take batteries. They do power themselves based on my movement. They have mechanical, automatic movements in them, but it's a similar thing. There's like kind of a romantic nature of kind of like an analog steel watch that, motivates people in a different way. Maybe it's not closing your rings, but a lot of people who enter into the hobby that I spend most of my time in around watches these days, oftentimes their first kind of nice-ish watch is a dive watch. And there's tons of people who've taken up scuba diving or water sport because they feel like if they're wearing a watch that can do that, they should go do that. So it's similar. It doesn't have to be necessarily a fancy device. It can be a very basic, technology that's been around for hundreds of years that can like motivate you to kind of try new things and test yourself in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. My last guest on my podcast actually is bringing back an old dive watch brand.
Cool.
Now it slips my mind. What's it called? But they had some really cool serendipitous
They should talk
moments
to me. I can help them with that.
I will put them in touch with you. But they had a really cool serendipitous moment where the guy, so they had bought the licensing for this brand. It was an old brand from like the 60s, 70s. And he was on a podcast and he left a watch there. And Jerry Seinfeld was next on the podcast and saw the watch. And he's like, this is the watch that I had when I was a kid. This was my first dive watch. And
wow.
And so they ended up blowing up because of that one podcast. He ended up talking about it like endlessly on that podcast, Jerry did. And so it helped him like launch back into the marketplace a bit, right? Like,
cool.
I'll send you, yeah. You guys can reference my last episode to find what watch it is for sure, right? But yeah, I'll send it over to you, Kyle. But I think I think looking at these things, right? Like, okay, what is the instrument that it's doing for me, right? Like, is it getting me into diving? And maybe at the end of the day, for somebody, a watch is just a confidence builder, right? Like, okay, it gives me that confidence to go talk to the girl that could maybe be my wife, right?
I think in some cases it can do that. Yeah, it's interesting because like the publication that I work for really focuses on what we call the approachable end of the watch market. Watches have become an ultra luxury object these days. And so there's plenty of publications and there's plenty of, resources out there that are about the luxury end of what we do. And in some cases that I think you start getting into a little bit of terminal, materialism. If you're just grabbing a watch because it's potentially worth money and putting it in a safe and never touching it, it's not an instrument at that point. It's not instrumental. Right. It's terminal, right? The story ended the second you closed the safe. So that's kind of like not what we do as a publication. And it is interesting because we're constantly trying to speak to a really unique consumer in the marketplace, which is not even a collector or the mass kind of consumer audience. It is a really unique type of consumer called the enthusiast. And the enthusiast is just an amazing target audience for any brand to go after. The enthusiast is really often into this idea of instrumental materialism. They are actively seeking objects to help them tell stories with, to go out there and do something with. And so it's been a pleasure to get to, through my career, to get to know the enthusiast audience super intimately and to understand the do's and don'ts of speaking to the enthusiast and how to create moments, experiential moments, whether those are digital experiences or audio or video experiences or in-person experiences that can really take a brand and endear the enthusiast to it. And that's been something that's been eye-opening and cool and fun because I consider myself an enthusiast consumer as well.
I think that's one of the funnest. I think that's one of the, at least for me, that's one of the funnest things about marketing is when you can get down with the consumer and really start to hear their stories with the product and how it's affected change in their lives. Like I know the brands that I've been associated with where like they used it as an instrument, right? And it affected change in their lives. It made my pursuits more fulfilling, but it also made it a lot easier to tell really good stories along those lines. And when I was with Ultra, and one of our big things was we wanted to be the authority in all things running, we weren't a publication. We weren't Runner's World, right? We weren't Running Times or Outside Magazine or any, but we knew that, okay, we're making a running shoe. Let's help people get out and leverage this tool as effectively and as efficiently as they can. And so let's give them the information, let's give them the content, let's push all of these things to them. And it was really fun to engage with those aspects of it. And one of the things that we started dabbling in that I wish we could continue to, I wish I could go still do today is we went around and did what we called run talks.
Yeah.
And we hosted these TED Talk style conversations at local running stores, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
sponsored those. And it was all around beneficial content and storytelling and really just trying to build and grow the running community. And if we sold some shoes, great. But at the end of the day, it was this aspect of like, okay, let's empower runners to be better runners, and let's give them the knowledge and the tools to do it. And I think that's such a powerful part of marketing when we can get into the nitty-gritty of the storytelling and really create and inspire in that way.
Yeah, I think the running community, especially, there's obviously like ultra runners and all of those kind of sub communities within the greater running community. That is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of tapping into that enthusiast mindset. And I'm sure you learned the do's and don'ts of speaking to them and in person and, obviously through marketing, but they can be a fickle crowd too. Like the enthusiasts can be fickle. And so there is a way, there's ways to kind of, make sure that you're coming in an authentic way to be transparent, to be, to like kind of level the playing field and approach things in that eye of education that really kind of help break down the deflector shields that so many of them have, because they are skeptics. Part of being an enthusiast is being extremely well-informed and cares deeply about the details. Sometimes your enthusiast consumer may know more about your business and your product than you do.
Absolutely.
So like it's vital that you, you kind of show them that respect in that kind of concepts.
They're also some of the early, like they're the best early adopters, right?
Yeah, precisely.
Because they are into it, right? And they are educated and they have found something that, okay, this is an instrument for me bettering whatever, right? And so there are a lot of brands that do really well with long form content, with this conversational, but what keeps other brands from investing in it, you think?
I think, it's hard to say, but I think that I would have to say, like, I can give a really good example. So, some of our clients that I work with regularly are pretty big brands. They're like multi-billion-dollar global watch brands who have come very, very specifically from a traditional marketing world and have recognized that there's opportunity within like the enthusiast community that we've cultivated at my day job, right? And they're like, how do we do this? Like, how do we get in there? And I think one of the things that boded really well for one of my clients, the Citizen, which is a watch brand, is that they started hiring enthusiasts. So they started bringing them on board as not just marketers, but actually product developers, right? And this was a massive change in their whole dynamic. This was a way for them to speak authentically in kind of the nerdy form factor of long form, right? Like, I think if you aren't an enthusiast already for your product, and there's plenty of people out there who maybe even start a company themselves that they're not necessarily an enthusiast for the company they begin. If you're not one already and can't see yourself kind of telling stories in the length that they deserve, find the people who are, find the nerds and the enthusiasts and the geeks, and bring them on board or freelance them and let them do their thing, and don't put, guardrails on them. Let them stretch their legs and really figure out, what is the right length of storytelling for this product or this service or this message, and embrace it, lean into it, enjoy it,
So what would you tell then? I love that, by the way, but what would you tell a marketer that is like, well, that sounds nice, but I can't attribute those dollars?
I mean, that's a good question. I would say, let's look at your full budget. Like, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and let's figure out how to maybe optimize. I don't know. It's a tough question because like there's so many different things out there, but I do come across brands who feel obligated to dump a lot of money into Meta and Google advertising. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm just like, you don't have to do that. You don't, they feel like if they don't, they're going to lose something like out there with like their Instagram followers or something like that. They're going to lose something. But I really have learned that, investing in the enthusiast is investing in your future, right? Like you said, enthusiasts are early adopters. They're the guy or gal in that circle of friends that when someone has a question about, let's say, running or watches, they're going to say, Jeremy knows about running. Turn to him. What does he think? Or Kyle knows watches. This happens to me all the time. Turn to him. What does he think I should do? So by investing in the enthusiast, you're creating, say, influencers with a lowercase I in all these circles of friends who are looking at the expert in that circle of friends to be the person to tell them what to do when the time comes to get that next pair of running shoes or get their kid a watch for college. So like, to me, I would say to marketers, don't feel beholden to what people think, what you think you have to do, especially with digital marketing.
Yeah.
Look at things differently. Shine things in a different light. And if you have an enthusiast-based product, think about how to go to where the enthusiasts are having those conversations and transparently and authentically participate, right? And it may not be through an Instagram ad to do that.
No, I agree. And I like the word enthusiast. I've used the word ambassador, right? Like same thing. I do like the word enthusiast.
I mean, an enthusiast may not be your ambassador yet. You have to earn
Sure.
You have to earn that from them. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But I think that's like from really we kind of got stuck really from probably 2014, 2015 to almost 2021 really. And okay, well, if I plug $1 into this Google machine or this Meta machine, right, then I can pull out $5, $6, $7 in some cases, right? And it's like walking into Vegas and putting money in the slot machine, and it pours out money every time, right? Like, okay, I'm going to keep doing that, right? Like
until they change the rules on you, which they do
and then
a lot.
Right, and then they change the rules, right? And we're seeing that over the last 4 years, really, right? Like the algorithm shifts, the rules change, the costs go up, and now I put $1 in, and in some cases, I'm lucky to get my dollar back out. And if I don't have a high LTV product, well, that's not very profitable, right? And so it's causing a lot of brands to rethink, like, what is our marketing strategy? Because I think, like, you go pre-2000 and you couldn't attribute any dollar, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
maybe with a phone number, right? Like, okay, call this 800 number. Okay, now we know that you came from this specific ad because we have 1,000 800 numbers out there, right? Like, but that was the only way you could really attribute it. You could get, okay, let's get Nielsen data or whatever, right? Like, how many people were viewing the Super Bowl this time, and okay, how many people came in and bought something over the course of the next week, right?
Sure,
like,
sure.
And you could do this quasi attribution, but with Google, with Facebook, with Instagram, right, with Snapchat, TikTok, all of the right, like I can see, okay, they hit my website, I spent this much, okay, came from that link, this customer was acquired that way, right? Like, great, I can follow this customer journey. Well, then private browsing happens, like you can't cookie as well, right? Like all of these things shift, and okay, now I'm guessing on attribution, and now I'm to the point where I'm guessing on attribution. Attributed dollars are much lower, and even even overall revenue from spend to revenue is not what it was 6, 7 years ago for sure. And
we're
so it
seeing
causes us all to rethink it.
Yeah, and it is resulting. One of the big things that it's resulting in, and again, I think probably why Substack is taking off, is like trying to win the inbox. The inbox is like the golden kind of ticket right now because it is direct attribution. It's interesting, man. Like we know on our own platform that enthusiasts visit a page 30 to 60 times before purchasing. So like an enthusiast is doing their homework in an insane amount of ways. But again, once they do make that decision, you have a really, really strong like reason to like trust that they've made a good decision because of how much research and they've done. And we scratched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the in-person power around the enthusiast marketing. You talked about, when with Ultra, you were creating this series of in-person discussions at running stores and doing group runs. There's something unique about getting a bunch of enthusiasts in a room and facilitating that kind of conversation, that kind of community, and just kind of being able to kind of set the table for that conversation. You don't have to be directly involved even. You just need to be able to like artfully set the table and let the conversation happen. And all of a sudden you are experiencing the goodwill from that table setting. Years ago, 10 years ago this year, Worn & Wound launched what they called the Wind Up Watch Fair. And this was a kind of a reaction to what was happening event-wise in the world of watches. Again, if you're not a luxury watch, for a long time you were pretending to be a luxury watch, and there's this faux sense of luxury that was permeating the watch community and just really kind of like, I think, rather kind of unappealing ways. And the founders of Worn & Wound, they had built some leather straps for watches, and they started taking them to kind of a cool, I would say, like that era of Tumblr and like hashtag menswear and made in the USA vibes from like 2014 or 2013. Was a place in New York called Pop-Up Flea that was just this pop-up flea sales kind of oriented flea market, but it had really cool brands like from like Red Wing to you name it, right? And so they started showing up there and selling leather straps, and all of a sudden they were just like, why don't we just do this for like watch brands? And so 10 years ago, they started with like 15 brands in Soho, New York. And last year in October, we were on Fifth Avenue with 140 brands from around the world, all in this table setting for the enthusiasts. It's not for us. It's not even for the brands. It's for watch enthusiasts. And so a couple things that we do around this to make it enthusiast savvy is, number one, it's free and open to the public. There's literally no barriers to letting people in. And number two, it's come as you are. It's not like suits and bow ties and evening gowns. It is literally like flip-flops and t-shirt. Come on in. Hopefully you have pants too, but like, you know what I mean? And we really encourage people to bring their family. We even make it pet friendly. Bring your pet. That's cool too. We're really trying to make it as open to the public as possible. So those are some of the first rules. Secondly,
that's like the antithesis of Fifth Avenue.
Correct.
That's awesome.
That is the dichotomy is real.
It sounds like this should be in Brooklyn, but it's like
it's
no, that's great.
That's where our office is based. So yes, it's rooted there, but like it's out of sheer just like space. Finding the right venue is not an easy thing, and the venue happened to be for this size event was on Fifth Ave.
No, I think it's fantastic, right? Like we were shopping on Fifth Avenue shortly before Christmas and just window shopping, right? And we walk into a store and my kids are like, "Can we be in here?" Like,
yeah.
And I think it was like Saks or something, right? Like, but everything is so fancy on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah. Like, this is like a purposeful juxtaposition to that, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
We tell our brands like no red velvet ropes, no appointments allowed, no watches under glass. Like in order for them to put watches under glass, they have to get approved from us. And it's all about getting people to get hands-on, to remove the barriers of to access to the brands, to have real conversations, to meet the people behind the brands. And it is an incredible experience. And like, again,
so are brands bringing out like their designers than like the people that are actually like, because a lot of like, I could see like brands sending like, okay, let's send intern Jenny out and whatever.
We brands have done that and they have not done well. But when they listen to us and they send out either the founders and the entrepreneurs behind the brand or the actual designers, like you said, that is what scratches that itch and creates that kind of like true kind of sense of community and respect for the enthusiast. So it's been really cool and fun to kind of I my first project for Worn and Wound was actually as a freelance consultant, and I was working on some B2B positioning for their advertising. And through the course of doing that, just a tagline came to mind. Is they didn't ask me to write a tagline for them, but it came to mind. So I presented my positioning statements for their B2B business. And at the very end, I kind of did one of those Steve Jobs, just one more thing. And I said, I through this process, a tagline came to light, and I want to share it with you. I know you didn't ask for it. And the tagline has nothing to do with watches. And it simply is experience enthusiasm. And that's what it feels like to walk through the door of Windup. You walk in, and the second you get there, you're like, so this is what enthusiasm feels like. I'm experiencing enthusiasm. And so I was really grateful that not only did they like the tagline, they immediately adopted it and trademarked it. And now it's part of not just the ethos of not just a tagline, but the ethos of the company. And it's been really exciting. And I feel honored that concept was so immediately embraced. And again, it gives us a permission slip to not just talk about watches either. And we're starting to dabble in talking about other kinds of instrumental materialism, whether that's, things you carry with you every day or things you use to capture the memories in your life, like photography. But it's been really cool because that's earned us a permission slip to tap into other types of enthusiasts with the same kind of principles. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be my next question, right? Like, because I love this concept. Have you guys tried to take it to other industries? Maybe as a separate event? Sounds
So
like you're looking at branching this event potentially into more than just watches.
That's kind of where we've started. Yeah. So we launched a section of the Wind Up Watch Fair last year called the EDC Expo, which is like the Everyday Carry Expo. And so, there's a couple there's a lot of proof points out there. People do these things called pocket dumps where they kind of lay out all the cool stuff that they have, whether it's their watch, their pen, their knife. There's actually a hashtag that's like watch knife pen. So we've reached out and we've had different really cool knife brands, pocket knife brands, pen brands, carry solutions, wallet brands, and photography and cameras are a big part of that too, of that same ethos. And so we've had Leica come and be at the fair before. And so this EDC Expo is doing two things for us. Number one, we all love this stuff. And so we get to see all these cool makers out there coming through and cool companies, some of them based in Utah. I will just say that they can come to the fair and participate through my connections there. And also, it actually becomes an avenue for people who are knife enthusiasts to come and see watches for the first time and start to see that the same level of enthusiasm they have for knives can be applied to some other object. And so it's really kind of like a symbiotic relationship to kind of for us to gain that permission slip to start talking about things other than watches, but that feel core to the enthusiast. It does lots of benefits, right? It cross-pollinates these enthusiasts. It doesn't hurt the SEO at all. It helps. And it actually exposes watch brands to a whole new audience of enthusiastic potential customers. So I think when you do it right and you do it with those permission slips in place and you do it in a thoughtful and curated manner, you can start to like take those same principles that you apply in one business and start to see how they can apply in others.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I love the concept. I think that concept resonates well across a lot of different industries, right? Like I think a car show in that vein would be really cool, right? Like to get specific designers that design a certain car, right? Like that could be like for car enthusiasts, they'd go nuts over stuff like that, right? Like
right. It's
to
so
see
weird
the guy like that designed the engine of like
I think it's interesting that there is this sense that you have to go after this faux sense of luxury. If there's not flutes of champagne and pinstripe suits, then you're doing it wrong. That is just not the fact. It's not true. It definitely isn't true with the enthusiast crowd. So, I mean, my advice to a lot of brands out there that I come in contact with is to like not worry about the formality of it all and look way more at the education and the connection aspect of it. So, we did an event with a very luxurious watch brand and, they had this centerpiece table and they turned to us and they said, so what's our floral budget? And I was just like, 0? We have no floral budget. And they're like, well, what are we going to put on this center table? And I'm like, can you bring in a watchmaker? Can you bring in someone who knows what's going on inside these objects and let him talk? or her talk. And they did. And they sold watches at this event that was just meant to be kind of like a bit of a kickoff party for a watch weekend. So it's thinking differently than feeling like, you need to have a floral budget. You don't need to have a floral budget.
Yeah. No, I think like going back to cars, and because there's really there's a few different type of car nerds out there, right?
Sure. I'm one of them, by the way.
But there's car nerds that are like jeans and t-shirt because they're under the hood, right?
Yeah,
like
they're tinkerers. Yeah.
But they love learning, like they love the car, right? Like restorers, like all like that aspect, right? And getting people to come and talk about like, this is why we did this with this car. This is how I designed this one or came up with this design feature or that, right? Like they'd eat it up, right? Like totally eat it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I think like cameras are another interesting thing too, because we're seeing this big push over the last few years back to film, right? And so like Fujifilm and some of these other like older Olympus and are playing in this world of like, okay, like we can bring film photography back, and it's making a little bit of some headway, and it's super interesting, right? Like, and it's an enthusiast world in that vein, right?
For sure. It's a macro trend, and I think an exact pendulum swing from the digital world that we are all stuck in, right? Like it impacts certainly of cameras right now. It's impacting the watch world right now. It's impacting the audio world right now. Like at our Target here in New York, you cannot buy a CD at all. There's no CDs for sale, but there's an entire aisle of vinyl in our Target. And my kids, that's what they're picking up. I have my kids right now are like way into like cassette tapes. Like, and my daughter asked for cassette tapes for Christmas, and that's what we ended up having to get her. So it is a macro trend.
Why cassette? Like, I understand vinyl because there's just this sound to vinyl.
There's a fidelity.
Cassette tape just seems like that was what got us through from vinyl to CD, and that was it.
Yeah. It's that romantic there's a romanticism to it. It is that Walkman 80s vibe. It's like why my kids now love going to the mall. They have nostalgia for a time they never existed in, and I think Stranger Things doesn't help that. It feeds it big time, right? But like
valid, yeah.
But like that's what that certainly is. They want a boombox and a Walkman right now for sure.
Okay. I haven't seen that one yet. Like that one hasn't come yet.
It's coming.
Like my son has totally gotten into, like, he's into Walmart. Well, he's in the Philippines now for the next 18 months, but before he left, he was big into Walmart or Target watches. Like you just because he liked the look of them, right? Like,
sure.
I'm sure if he had his budget and got his hands on some of these classics, right? Like he'd be nuts over it. But like, so I get it, right? I guess cassette tapes is like, that's kind of where it's like, I might draw the line there.
I don't know. It's coming.
I grew
it is
up
coming
on
for you.
Cassette tapes, so I guess
me too. Mixed tapes, buddy.
Like it's like I know what cassette tapes are capable of, and they're not capable of much.
Well, I think that it is interesting, but yeah, man, I had my best mixed tapes are still kind of seared in my mind forever.
Sure. No, there is nostalgia there for sure. So no, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't run into that one. I've been around a lot of teenagers over the last 5 years. That's not what I've come across yet. So
it's coming for you. It's coming for you.
We'll have to see. We're a little behind the trends out here in Utah versus you guys in New York, though.
Apparently. Or we're just like so behind that no, I'm just joking. Cool.
Oh, that's funny. I love I love how philosophically you've kind of come to this moment in your career where it's like, okay, like this is where I'm telling stories, but kind of take us through your journey a little bit. So so college, you're a film major, you have this aha moment at the theater, right? And it's like, okay, now I'm going to tell stories, but you've been working for agencies, you've been on publication, you've been on brand side, like kind of walk us through like, how do you go from film major to like, because you're not behind the camera with your career right now.
I mean, I oddly enough, I've been not physically behind the camera, but behind the person behind the camera a lot.
Okay.
I produce tons and tons of video and film shoots regularly and have for most a chunk of my career. So yes, my education has served me well, which I'm grateful for. Right out of school with a degree in film and a minor in comms, I quickly and fortunately started collaborating with some graphic design students at BYU. A friend of a friend became a fast friend and he had a couple of pretty big clients for a kid just out of college. And so we formed a small agency of four of us in an 800 square foot space in downtown Salt Lake City called Struck. And we were doing digital design and web design right before a lot of people got into it. And we were just like, the timing could not have been better. And, I remember vividly sitting in this 800 square foot space in downtown Salt Lake City. There was a phone at each of our desks. And when the phone would ring, we'd all kind of scramble for it. And I just seemed very unprofessional to me. It kind of drove me crazy. So after a couple of weeks of that, I was like, guys, when the phone rings, I will answer it. If it's for you, I'll transfer it to you. And that was one of these moments you talked about earlier, one of these serendipitous kind of career setting moments. The moment I said, I will answer the phone first, I turned myself into the company's first sales guy, first account guy, first receptionist. But like that moment changed what I did for the vast majority of my career, because it made me have to be able to kind of explain what we did and that you should work with us. And so that company grew from 4 guys in an 800 square foot space to 4 offices and 80 people when I left. And that was an 11-year period that kind of rode the wave through digital just going bonkers and being the Wild West. We started off doing these really intricate Flash microsites that put us on the map very, very, very quickly on a global map. And every single agency on the planet was calling us to do production for microsites. And our specialty with those was to embed video in Flash. And that had me as the producer of these microsites, producing video for them too. And again, tapping into my college education, which was great. I was also leading...
Back before Adobe bought Macromedia.
Correct. It did. So we saw Adobe buy Macromedia. We saw the launch of MySpace. We saw the launch of Facebook. We saw the launch of the iPhone, which again was a seismic change in digital space. And riding those waves was an incredible time period. I transitioned into head of new business, and we were at that point winning business against national agencies out of Salt Lake City. We were winning business against national agencies that we had no business even pitching against, which was a crazy and wild ride, and felt just, very exciting to be able to go up against some of these clients that were creating the stuff that I was inspired by. The very agency that created that ad that I saw in the movie theater, I pitched against and won from a small agency in Salt Lake City. So it was
what a nice little moment, right?
It was extremely satisfying, let me say.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And you get to a point where you're like, okay, so there's no other company in this market that I would work for or do the level of work that I'm doing right now. And so you start thinking how good am I? How far can I go? If this is this can't just be it, and those feelings did start creeping in after 11 years at this company. And one day I came into work and there was actually a voicemail for me, and it was a recruiter. And it was right before Christmas time. I didn't call him back. And after I came back from the Christmas break, you just take the call. I said no to him 3 times until he gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. And that moved my family from Salt Lake City to New York. And this is where I grew up out here. So it was kind of a homecoming for me, but my wife's from California. So I dragged her across the nation with my 4 kids. And, we live in a town right outside New York City. And I started a job on Madison Avenue. And it was interesting. I felt, again, one of those things where I got here and we transplanted the entire family. And after about a week, I was like, what have I done? Because I was working in a dinosaur agency on Madison Avenue, an agency that literally was around in Mad Men times. And, it was just a different pace. It was a different dynamic.
Yeah.
I was, I felt pretty stoked that I got this job. But then I was like, this is like dinosaur advertising. This is not nearly as cutting edge or as like creative as I had been doing for the previous 11 years. And I had an interesting email. I got an email while I was working at this agency on Madison Avenue. I got an email from Pinterest, and the Pinterest person said, "Hey, I found your Pinterest board, and I would love to do a little spotlight on you and your Pinterest boards." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So she sent me a little questionnaire, and in it, I answered these questions about how I find my pins and where I search for content. And I mentioned that I use the app Flipboard to find a lot of my pins.
Yeah.
A week after it was published, Flipboard called me and said, "Who are you? And why did you mention this on our competitor's platform?" And they published it. And I met the team from Flipboard, which, a few months later, they gave me yet another offer I couldn't refuse. And fortunately, that's what introduced me to the world of digital publishing and
Was this
introduced me.
fairly early Flipboard? Was this like?
Yeah. So this would have been 2015, 2016, and Flipboard had been around since kind of like the inception of the iPad. So it had been around for maybe 5 or so years. But I went to Flipboard and met the people at Gear Patrol. I met the people at Vox Media and the people at Worn and Wound, and this is what kind of then set my career off in this world of digital publishing. And honestly, I've never looked back. So it is those moments. It's those little silly little moments that just have these exponential impacts on the course of things that
So
you
was
have to pay attention for.
were they based out in New York, or
They had
did you
an
work remotely for them?
They had an office in New York that I worked at, and they were based in Palo Alto, California.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were able to work out of there. So you moved to New York, like, because obviously you've stayed there for the last over a decade, right?
Yeah, 10 years this year.
But short-lived at the ad agency on Madison Ave.
Yeah.
But you were already out there and able to
plug in. Yep.
Yeah.
So wild stuff. Here I am.
The wife ever try to talk you into going out to the Palo Alto office and say, "Let's go back to my home and go to California"?
You can take the girl out of the California. You can't take the California out of the girl. That's what I've learned.
That's what I've heard. So awesome. Well, there's so many more things we could dive into here, but we're all like, this has been awesome. This has been fun.
Thanks.
What continues to motivate you as you coming up with new ideas, creating's hard. Like, it's not easy for any creator, right? Whether you're an artist, a musician, whatever it is, writer, it's not easy. So what is it that motivates you? What keeps helping you fuel new ideas, etc.?
It's a good question. I really think that I have strived to put challenges in my life that I want to accomplish and just really kind of ran at those challenges. So back when I lived in Utah, I remember I challenged myself, back to the car conversation, to put on a car show. And I just did it. I just went out and rallied a bunch of people together and put on a little car show. And that was fun. And a few years ago, I had a good friend who called me up and said he wanted to create a little product company. And so we just challenged ourselves to do it. And we created a little menswear accessory company, and still kind of hums along on the side there, as side hustles do. And then last year, I felt like I wanted to get back in touch with my film school roots. And so I challenged myself to just write a full-length feature screenplay on the subway. The last time I attempted that, I was right out of school, and I had to use a computer in a room with a specific software package on it. 20 years later, I can literally just whip up my phone between stops on the subway and add a few lines of dialogue. And so I just decided I'm going to write a full-length feature screenplay on my cell phone on the subway. And it's not great, but I did it. It requires a few rewrites for sure, but I challenged myself to do it. And so I think setting small challenges for yourself that are attainable, they cannot be too lofty, they cannot be too crazy. They have to be something that's going to be an actual doable goal. It feels rewarding, especially when it has a creative angle to it. So I just try and challenge myself to stoke my creativity with these small, but it's still kind of impactful challenges. It's not small to write a 90-page screenplay, but I challenged myself to do it in a way that felt doable and attainable, right?
And I like how you're doing it outside of your standard 9 to 5 career,
Yeah,
right? Like
have to, but yeah,
because then it broadens, it gives you the opportunity to broaden a little bit outside of what you're seeing on your computer every
yeah,
day while you're at the office or whatever, right?
totally,
So
totally.
no, that's great. Well, before we wrap, I want to run through a series of rapid fire questions for
Cool.
you.
Do my best.
So feel free, answer these. You can take as long as you want if you want, but they are rapid fire, so I'll just fire them off here. What frightens you?
Spiders?
It's fair. All right. What inspires you?
I'm gonna go with I still like journalism. Like journalism is still a thing for me. I love like good, well-written articles.
Love it. It feels like we don't get as much as like the quality. There's a lot of quantity out there, and
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
not as much quality, and so trying to siphon through and find the quality is tricky. So, what are some of your favorite publications that you like to read outside of Worn and Wire and
And
Worn and Wound?
worries. I I still read. I like backpacking and I like outdoors. So I think Outside Magazine does a great job with their journalism. It's something I turn to pretty frequently. Um, I really like design and architecture, and I love Dwell Magazine was another magazine that I used to have a subscription to, but now I just read online. Um, let's see what else. No, that's a couple to go with it. Are
Okay.
Yeah.
I assume you're not using Flipboard for these
I
publications.
I do love I use Flipboard almost all the time, even though I don't work there
Still
anymore.
okay.
Oh
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, I love it. It's right on my home screen. And I guess another great publication is fieldmag.com. It's a local Brooklyn-based online magazine that really is doing some great work in storytelling around the outdoors. Fieldmag.com.
Cool. I'll have to check that one out. That sounds fun. What gives you hope for the future?
It's interesting. I have a role right now where I represent my church's congregation in a interfaith coalition of about 30 different churches, different religions. And I really it's been interesting to be around faith-based people in my life that aren't of my faith, but like are faith-based people. And I think that even though these are hard times and there's like an epidemic of like, people out there who aren't claiming to any sort of religion anymore. I think that it's showing that the people who are faith-based people out there are more similar than they are different, which I think is really inspiring.
No, I love that. I love interfaith work, and I think that we could all do more, whether we have a faith that we are tied to, or if we claim atheist or agnostic or whatever. Like there are great opportunities to come together through these interfaith coalitions or whatever. Like there's a lot of opportunities to grow. There's a couple of books that I've really like. I love Robert Putnam. I don't know if you've ever read anything by him, but Bowling Alone is one of his really good ones. And then he had a follow-up to it. I'm actually looking on my shelf to see if I can remember the name, but he talks a lot about just the importance of creating diverse communities and having diverse conversation, right? And it goes back to where we started, right? What is conversational dialogue, right? And conversational communication, and it's so important that we can have these conversations and get into depth on these because they break down walls, they break down barriers, they go beyond our hardcore dogmatic beliefs, whether it be in faith or in politics or in how we should raise our children or whatever, right? Like, but it lets us get more in depth with each other and tear down some of those walls and start to build more bridges. So, no, that's awesome. I love it. What a great responsibility and a great thing to be a part of. What's something you'd want to tell your 18-year-old self?
I think I would tell myself, I don't know. I probably tell myself a lesson that I've learned over these years about how I think it really the way to find success in life is really boils down to two rules. It's work hard and be cool and everything that entails. Like just be the hardest worker and just be cool. Meaning like don't take things too seriously. Keep a cool head when everyone else is like losing theirs. And, like be nice, like be thoughtful, be friendly, just be cool. Just work hard and be cool. And then that is how you can succeed.
Absolutely. What book are you reading right now?
Boy, I have so many that I have not finished lately, but the one that I'm closest to finishing is called Open. It's the biography of Andre Agassi, who's my favorite athlete of all time.
Okay. What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
Open, the biography of Andre Agassi.
Going back to the, all right, okay. No, that's great.
I am, you've mentioned a lot of books. I'm famously more short form reader. I dig into articles like on a daily basis, and I'm kind of like consume them rampantly, and I'm lousy at reading novels. But yeah,
Not a big novel reader.
Yeah.
My books are philosophy books,
Mm-hmm.
faith-based books, or
Mm-hmm.
business books, or
Nice.
biographies. I love biographies.
Cool.
But I don't read a lot of fiction or not. Like,
Yeah.
I probably should read more to stretch my creative mind a little bit, but I just don't. So,
Yeah. All good.
what's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
We we love travel. We love exploring, and I love all kinds of places. We were fortunate enough to be able to go visit Iceland 3 years ago, and I have been dying to go back. I think it's just a place where it feels otherworldly. It feels everyone's super duper nice there, and I know I think it just clicked with us in terms of like a terrain and a kind of a vibe that just really fits who I am, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, my friend and his wife, they went and they did a through hike along
Mm.
Iceland.
Yep.
It was like a supported thing, so they'd carry your
Mm-hmm.
bags from one like house to the next, and
Mm-hmm.
so they were able to see so much of the countryside and travel. Like,
Yeah.
and it just like that would be so rad. Like, just take a day pack with you, don't like, and just get out and enjoy it. I'd
Yeah,
probably still
totally.
have a big backpack with 4 lenses and my camera, but I wouldn't have to carry my sleeping bag and stuff.
Yeah,
But no,
exactly.
it'd be, yeah. I haven't been on the short list. That and New Zealand to me are like two
Yeah.
places that just seem like just flat out magical. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, when you go, like hit me up and I'll give you some good recos.
yes, sounds good. I look forward to it. So where can people keep up with you or follow you?
Sure. So anything let's see. Back when I worked in Salt Lake City, we worked with a photographer who had a very intense stutter, especially when he was trying to say people's names. But when he made up a nickname in place of that person's name, he wouldn't stutter when he said their name. So he used to call me instead of Kyle because he would stutter when he'd say the name Kyle. He made up a nickname for me called Kyality. And that has become my online where to find me. So any place Kyality is where I am. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. We will throw those in the show notes, but that's great. Kyle, any parting words? Like, this was fantastic. Thank you
No,
for your
it's
time today.
great to catch up with you again and keep up the great work. I think it's important for us to have conversations, right? Like it's all about like getting to know people's experiences and learning from one another. And, I think it is an interesting time in our world, in our society for us to like be talking about things like materialism and stuff like that. This is being recorded like a week after a lot of people lost a lot of stuff in a huge fire in LA, right? And so like I've been thinking a lot about just the stuff that we have and what would you take and all that kind of things. And as much as, I believe in like there is such thing as good materialism, stuff that really matters are these relationships that we keep. And so it's been great to have this relationship, ongoing with you, even though we've probably met each other like maybe twice in person over a couple of decades. But it's great to know that you're a friend, and this has been an awesome conversation.
Likewise. Appreciate you, Kyle.
Yeah,
Thanks a
no
lot.
worries.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody,
bud.
for joining us on A Bit of Curiosity.